Thanks for hosting us, Lasheen.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to rely on the experts in the room, Eve and Harrison. Do these things usually start right at 6 o'clock, or should we give folks a few minutes to sign in?
I would say usually some people come late, but it's hard to tell.
I'm actually at a tennis match right now, so I don't know how much of the conversation I'll be able to join in on, but I will be here and I'll be listening. And I might pop in a few questions, but they do start on time, yes. Or sometimes, actually.
Perfect. Nicole is here.
Hi.
Hey, Nicole. Well, I'll just go ahead and kick us off, and if we have folks join us, that's great. I am Misty Graves, and I'm the interim director of the Department of Human Services that serves as the hub for Youth Council. And as some of you know, most of you should know, Daniel's out on paternity leave. And so I have the honor and privilege of being the point of contact for Youth Council for the next few weeks. Welcome, everybody. I see Caroline has joined us. Hi, Caroline.
Hi.
So just want to check in before I introduced our guest speaker. We have a guest speaker today, Alex Weathersby, and she is from the Shelter for Help in Emergency. And before I hand things over to her, I just want to check in with you all so that you can introduce yourself to Alex. Just introduce yourself and say one thing that you're looking forward to now that the weather is getting a little bit warmer. Why don't you kick us off, Harrison?
Well, I'm Harrison, and then I guess I'm a senior at CHS, and then I've been on Youth Council for like 6 years now, I'm pretty sure. And then something I'm looking forward to with nice weather is just doing like homework outside, because I like to like read and do homework better when it's warm outside and sunny. I think I get work done better.
Absolutely. Caroline, why don't you go next? You're next on my screen.
Yeah, I'm Caroline. I'm also a senior at CHS, though I haven't been on Youth Council for quite as long. And I guess I'm looking forward to like hanging out with friends outside. And this is like not directly related, but it being light out for later is really nice.
Absolutely. I love that extra light. Eve, I know you're at a tennis match. Can you check in to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, oh shoot, sorry, that's odd. Hi, I'm Eve. I'm also a senior at CHS. I've been on the Youth Council for, Harrison said 6 years, so I guess 6 years. I think I am most looking forward to like sitting outside at lunch and not being freezing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Being able to eat lunch outside seems so nice. And Nicole?
Yeah, hi, I'm Nicole. This is my first year on youth council. And favorite thing is probably hanging out with friends outside.
Yeah, little extra space. Love that. All right, well, thanks for checking in. And so we'll spend most of our time having Alex do her presentation for Shelter for Help in Emergency, or the SHE Shelter, and giving an overview about what that program or organization offers to the community, but also touching on some key points about healthy relationships. So Alex, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having me. We also have a staff member over here who's on maternity leave. So it's very exciting. All of the lovely little babies being born in the area. But I'm Alex. I'm the prevention services coordinator at the Shelter for Help in Emergency. So most of what I do is working with middle and high school aged youth. But like today I was over in Louisa working with some Girl Scouts and stuff like that. But while Liesel's on maternity leave, I'm also doing a lot of the community engagement and volunteering stuff. So is it okay if I jump right in? Are we waiting for anybody? Okay.
Go for it.
Cool. By the way, thank you all for having captions set up. I cannot tell you how many Zoom meetings I've been in where they don't have them, and it makes it a lot easier for me to process if they're already on. So kudos to you all for having that set up.
That's all the she.
Yeah, it's nice. So the Shelter for Help in Emergency, we serve the areas of Charlottesville, Albemarle, Greene, Louisa, Fluvanna, and Nelson. And we primarily serve survivors of intimate partner violence. They don't have to be people who have lived in the same home. They don't have to be people who were married or are still married at any point, as long as they've had some kind of intimate relationship at some point. If that relationship was at any point in time abusive, then they can receive services from us. We offer a bunch of different services. Some people will come in and use a ton of them. Some people only really connect with us because they need one particular thing. But most of those our first connection, most of the people first connect with us through our 24-hour crisis hotline, because that's a good way for people to call in and just chat if they are stressed about something, if they've been triggered in some way. But it's also a good way to find out about what their particular needs are, especially if they're not ready to leave the relationship yet and they just want to talk through some of their options. So we do have an emergency shelter in an undisclosed location. We have an outreach office that's located in Charlottesville City. And so sometimes people will come there and then be transported from there to the emergency shelter. And people stay there with their children, if they have children, and if the children want to be in shelter with them. And that's just a nice place for them to get their bearings and work from a safer point in time if they are living with their abuser or their abuser knows where they are. We also offer counseling services. We can help people connect with SNAP and TANF and any kind of other benefits that they might need, especially if the abusive person was the main breadwinner in the home or they were getting most of their access for resources from that person. We do a lot of referring to other community agencies. There's a lot of overlap between people who've been abused and mental health issues or substance dependence. If there's young kids in the home, then there might also be referrals to like school guidance counselors or other people who can connect with them on the more day-to-day. And then we also have a Spanish speaking advocate that we recently hired, and she does primarily legal advocacy, but she does a lot of the information and referral for Spanish speaking clients. So that's just an extra cultural piece that helps people who need extra support, especially with immigration documents and things like that. But we also have another legal advocate and a lethality assessment protocol person. So they mostly work with law enforcement or with survivors who want protective orders, or who maybe they already have a protective order, but they're not really sure how it works. They're not really sure how the court process works. They're confused about custody. So it's just having an extra person who can support, maybe explain terminology, and make sure that they're not confused about anything and they're ready to go through the process and prepared to go through the process. Then most of what I do is prevention and education programming. So I work with schools, clubs, scout troops, church groups. I'll pretty much go anywhere and work with anybody as long as people want to have conversations. And we do a lot of healthy relationship and bystander intervention programming, which you're going to see a little bit of today. And then I'm trying to get the Pet Safe program back up and running. So this is a partnership with local boarding kennels to house pets on the short-term and temporary basis. If the pet owner is coming into shelter with us, our shelter is not really equipped for people to bring their animals. So once we have relationships with boarding kennels in the area, that's where their pets can be dropped off and stay while they're in shelter with us. But that was kind of difficult to maintain during COVID. So we're in the process of kind of recreating it now. Does anybody have any questions or any comments about anything on this slide? Okay, you can also post it in the chat. I do have the chat up if you would prefer to do that instead of unmuting. So I'll keep an eye on that as well. Okay. So I like to do a lot of discussion stuff for my programming because I feel like sometimes just watching me talk for a really long time gets boring for people, especially if they've been doing everything online. So you can unmute if you would like, or you can post in the chat, but what do you all think a relationship needs to be healthy? So this could be a platonic relationship, it could be a romantic relationship, a familial relationship, but what do you think needs to be there for it to be healthy?
I can start, and then I would say like honesty, and then that would lead to trust between the people in the relationship. And I would think that to be healthy, you would need to be able to trust the other person to like not hurt you and to like make you feel good in situations.
Yeah, so honesty is a really big one, and trust is a really, really big one. Something I see a lot in all of the areas we work in is there's a lot of jealousy in the unhealthy relationships that come up. So not trusting their partners and saying, because I can't trust you, you have to then give up your power of who you talk to, how often you see them, who you follow on social media and stuff to me. I see Eve said honest and respectful communication. Yeah, that's really important. In order to have an idea of what other people's boundaries are, we have to be able to communicate that. I like equal effort from everyone. That's a really big one too. A lot of times with the people who are staying in shelter with us, they've been taught that they have to give up all of their power, all of their choices to the other person. And so that equal effort is something that's really unfamiliar to them. The idea that they can be on an equal standing with another person and that they deserve to be treated well and not just give all the time. Any other thoughts?
It might be kind of loud in the background because my brother's playing electric guitar, but I think like having boundaries and respecting other people's boundaries.
Yeah, so having boundaries and respecting other people's boundaries. So that's how I always like to describe consent, is having a conversation about those boundaries because everybody has them. And that's another thing where a lot of people who come and work with us were never allowed to have boundaries. They weren't allowed to say no, or that they were uncomfortable with something. So for them, it's really new to be able to make choices, even if it's just, do you want to check in with me before you leave, or would you rather check in over email or text? Something like that is really small and simple, but it does a great job of representing how important boundaries are. Very, very nice. Okay. Any other thoughts before I move on? Okay. So all of those things are definitely parts of a healthy relationship. Most relationships that we have fall somewhere on a spectrum. So the farther that we go towards that unhealthy and abusive side of the spectrum, the more unequal the power difference gets. So in healthy relationships, we might have our own boundaries, our own opinions and thoughts and ideas, but we all are still able to make our own choices and communicate with each other. And when we're building relationships with each other, we're able to meet in the middle and all have equal say. As it's moving more towards an unhealthy relationship, maybe that's people not communicating very well, not listening to each other, not being honest about what it is that they want. And then towards the abusive side, it keeps going where one person starts to think their opinions, their feelings, their thoughts matter more than the other. And they just want to have what they want all the time. They don't really care about the other person. So because it is a spectrum, we can start on one space and move more towards another space. I will say that for something to go from the abusive side to shift more towards being healthy, it has to be an active choice on everyone's part. Somebody has to actively choose to not get their way all the time for the other person's opinion to matter. It's not a choice that some people are willing to make. So I just like to clarify that, because abusing other people is a choice. It's not something that people do accidentally or fall into. So with healthy relationships, you all said a lot of these. You mentioned communication, being respectful, being trusting, and being honest. Enjoying personal time apart, whether it's by yourself or with other friends. Again, something I've heard a lot from local high schoolers in this area and the surrounding areas is being told they're not allowed to hang out with certain people, or that they have to spend all their time with their partner or the one friend. So having that personal time is a really big green flag, in my opinion, just because we see it so often. And being able to make decisions for the whole relationship together and having both people's point of view, not just one person saying, we're going to do this, and that's already decided. Moving into being unhealthy, so not having that communication, not being respectful towards each other, not being trusting, being dishonest. One person's trying to prioritize their own desires, their own choices over the other person. When people ask the difference between unhealthy and abusive, I would say that unhealthy might not necessarily involve people trying to take power and control away from someone else. It might just generally not be communicating well, or not putting in the equal effort. But with abusive relationships, one person's trying to take all of the power away from the other person, although making a difference between them isn't always necessary. If someone's unhappy, they don't feel like they're getting what they need, then that's really all that matters. They don't have to wait until a relationship becomes dangerous in order to break it off. And then for something to be abusive, right, there's a lot of disrespect. A lot of the communication is very aggressive, very threatening or demeaning. Emotional abuse is very, very common among your age group. And in these areas, we see it a lot. Putting their partners down and making them feel like they're not deserving of positive things, that they don't deserve the things that they want, that they're not smart enough, or they'll never accomplish their dreams, right? A lot of, well, I only take control of these things because you're not able to do it, so I have no choice but to have control over everything. There's a lot of blaming the other person, which can make it really hard to leave that relationship later if you feel like everything is your fault and you're the one who's actually creating the situation through your behavior, right? There's a lot of controlling and isolating, controlling who they hang out with, their support system, cutting off people's family members, telling them, oh, well, your mom doesn't support our relationship, so you should stop talking to her. And a lot of pressure to do things that they don't want to do. So it might not always escalate to the point of actually physically hurting someone or actually doing things, but even just the threat of, if you don't do what I say, I'll call your boss and tell them lies about you, or I'll tell all your friends about this one thing that you did, and then everybody's going to hate you, right? Even just the threat of those things can be enough to force somebody to comply. So is there any thoughts or comments about these 3 parts of the spectrum? Anything that comes to mind from you? Is there anything that you all think is missing or needs to be added to these slides?
I just have a question. So when people like come to your I guess organization, are you giving them this like same presentation just to like watch out for these signs? Like this is what an abusive relationship looks like while they're doing counseling, I guess, or like this is what you can do to avoid abusive relationships, or these are like red flags or stuff, or is this just like general information that they should know already?
Good question. So a lot of people don't know this information because a lot of times they either don't think it applies to them, like they might know logically what abuse is, but they've made a lot of excuses, or there's been a lot of blame pushed their way. So they might not think this is actually applying to their relationship. Or for a lot of people we work with, they might not have ever received this kind of information in school, or they lived in a really rural area where it was just considered normal to not talk about certain things. Everybody knows everybody, so keep your personal business private type of thing. So this isn't something we give people as a formal presentation when they come work with us, but a lot of our survivors work with case managers and with legal advocates and with counseling. This will come up. It might be more in like a casual conversation type of thing, or we have a power and control wheel, which looks like there's this one, which has a bunch of different behaviors. And then this one talks about the cycle of abuse. A lot of times they'll show them this and just talk with them through it and be like, is there anything that you've noticed in your relationship that seems to click with this? And a lot of the survivors will say, oh yeah, like my partner is always screaming at me and then telling me that she didn't mean it. She just gets upset because of something I do, and then it's my fault. So a lot of times we do help them make those connections. It's just not in such a formal way like this. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Any other thoughts or questions? Okay. So we do talk about the cycle of abuse. This might be familiar to some of you. It might not be. It really just depends. Some people already have learned certain things like this in their family life classes, or were taught this by their parents, and some people have not. But when we talk about the cycle of abuse, it's really important for helping people understand that it's not something that's magically going to go away. At the core of this, both on the abusive person and the survivor's perspective, everybody's in denial. So the abuser's in denial that they're actually choosing to act this way towards another person and that they can stop if they want to, right? And then the survivor's denial is denial that what's happening is not going to change and that it's something that's going to get more and more dangerous over time. So whenever the abuse happens, whether it's screaming and throwing things or taking somebody's credit card and saying they're not allowed to use it anymore, or kicking them out of the house, right? Whatever it is, we just like to think of that as an explosion. So that's right at the bottom of the cycle. So after that, the abuser's main goal is, I want to keep the survivor from leaving. I don't want them to react in a normal way to this explosion of my behavior. So they now have to minimize what happened, blame it on something else. Maybe it's drugs, maybe it's alcohol, maybe it's having a stressful day, maybe it's often it's a lot of time blaming it on something the survivor did that's very innocuous, like, oh, well, you didn't have dinner set up just the way I liked it, so I had no choice but to like destroy everything in the kitchen. And this will also be paired with a lot of loving behavior. So suddenly they'll be giving the person a lot of flowers, a lot of gifts, a lot of time. They might say, let's take this big fancy trip we've been planning. Let's get married. Let's have a baby, right? So they're trying to convince the survivor that this was just a one-time fluke, that everything will be fine as long as the survivor does what they want, and that this isn't going to happen again. But because it's not actually the survivor's behavior that's causing the abuse, it will shift eventually back into a tension building phase, where no matter how carefully the survivor walks on eggshells, how much they try to make everything be perfect, and they're trying to not set the other person off, inevitably, it's going to go right back into that explosion again. And usually the tension building phase involves little things that are all building up to a more dangerous explosion. So a lot of small put downs or passive aggressive behavior leading up to some aggressive behavior. And over time, the explosions get more and more physically dangerous, and the honeymoon and tension building phases get shorter and shorter. So if somebody's been in a relationship like this for a really long time, they might be able to, at that point, notice and pinpoint what's coming, even if they can't actually do anything to stop it. So are there any thoughts about the cycle of abuse? Comments, questions, concerns?
I think I'm just supposed to be a listener.
You can
but,
share thoughts if you want, Misty.
I had a thought just because it just struck me. It only happens about 4 or 5 times in this in this graphic. But there are some gender pronouns that may not be accurate.
Yeah, it's an old version of the wheel. I'm looking for another one that's not a PDF because I can't put PDFs into a PowerPoint for some reason. But this one is unfortunately gendered. However, this can happen in any gender combination of a relationship. I'm glad you pointed that out. So thank you very much, Misty. This one does use he, him pronouns to refer to the abusive person and she, her to refer to the survivor. However, it can look any particular way. And our office has served people of all genders who've had abusers of all genders. So that's something that I think is important to highlight. So thank you for bringing it up. This one I was able to edit. So this one is specifically focused on teens. So this was something that we pulled from another resource to really highlight the particular forms of abuse that are perpetrated by teenagers against other teenagers that they're in relationships with. For a lot of adults, things like peer pressure and social status will look really different than for young people. For young people, a lot of you are in the position to have a lot of money on your own. You might not be able to control where you go all the time. You may or may not be able to drive, right? You may or may not have a job. But things like social status and peer pressure specifically are really common within intimate partner violence among young people. So just taking a look at this wheel, I'm not going to read everything out unless somebody would like me to, but does anything sort of jump out at you when you're looking at this? And again, you can unmute or you can post in the chat. Either one is fine.
Could we maybe talk about intimidation a little?
Yes. So for intimidation, that one is really common in a lot of different ways, right? Regardless of the type of abuse, intimidation is used to make another person feel smaller, to make them feel weaker, and to really push home the idea that I'm stronger than you, and so you don't want to cross me. So a lot of these things, whether it's displaying a weapon that they have, so if their family has a gun in the home, right, making sure it's out and cleaning it whenever their partner's over, abusing pets, that could be their own pet or their partner's pet, destroying their partner's property. Something I've seen a lot is destroying people's room, their phones, their computers, especially if it's something they use for school, ripping up their homework, trashing people's cars is something I see a lot, especially among teenagers. It could be like a uniform that they need for school or for a sport. It could be like scholarship forms, like really just anything. But none of these things have to actually involve me physically making physical contact with somebody else, right? Or even me directly doing those things. It might even just be the threat of me abusing a pet or the threat of me trashing somebody's car, right? So with intimidation, even just the fear that I might do something that could severely impact somebody's life does a lot of that work. So with intimidation, fear is really the main emotion that somebody's trying to create there.
Thank you.
Mhm. Any other thoughts? Anything else jump out at you?
I just was noticing the pink circle of minimize, deny, and blame. And for like, I feel like a lot of situations, the people don't really realize they're being abused in the first place, which is which that is saying. But then in that situation, how would they like come to you all to get that?
Right.
Is my question, I guess.
Yes, that's a great question. So if somebody doesn't know that what they're experiencing is abuse, or they've minimized it, or they're blaming themselves, then they're probably not going to go immediately to the domestic violence shelter. So that's a very good point. For this reason, and we know statistically, most young people will actually talk to a friend first if they're experiencing something like this, and they might not ever use the word abuse or violence. They might use something like, oh, I'm in a toxic relationship, or I just don't like the way that my partner treats me, or I feel like it's a bad relationship. That's the term I've heard used a lot. And so whenever people reach out to their friends, their club mates, their classmates, their siblings, we always suggest that people have a resource that they can recommend. Because if your friend's coming to you and is describing a bunch of things that fall into these circles, and you know that they are types of violence, then because you already have that trust built and you already have the information, if you say, hey, if you call these people and talk to them, then they might be able to help you with this or recommend something that you know is helpful, then that can make a really big difference, even if they're never comfortable connecting with us, or even if they never think they need to talk to us. Does that make sense? So one of the reasons why my job is so important is that if I spread this information to a ton of people in the community, then we can all help each other and connect with each other, even if they never come through our doors. So excellent point. Anything else before I move to the next slide? So have you ever had that situation, right? Has anybody ever come to you about being in an unhealthy or abusive relationship in your life? So I know for me, this happened a lot in high school. It happened a lot in college. And again, a lot of times people didn't use the term domestic violence or intimate partner violence or anything like that. But it definitely came up when we were just talking about family situations or friendships or relationships. People would say a lot about just being uncomfortable or being unhappy. Does this happen to anybody else?
I think I've had like people, like friends, talk about just like, I wouldn't say more of the unhappy side, and not really like extremely super unhealthy, but more just like not super happy either. And I feel like I've like recommended trying like ending the relationship, but I also think it's kind of different because in my experiences it hasn't been as extreme.
Fair point. I do think a lot of people will notice if they're unhappy early on. It doesn't have to be something that's dangerous or abusive for it to be something that's just not serving them. So I think it's totally fair to give advice or suggest that maybe that's not something they should continue to be in, if even if it's just like they don't have the same goals. That makes sense. So there's a lot of different ways that we can support people. It really depends on their situation. So whether or not somebody's experiencing abuse, just listening to what they have to say and not being judgmental can be really helpful, especially if somebody has maybe made not great choices or done things that they're not proud of. It might make them feel less comfortable sharing what's actually going on beneath the surface. So being non-judgmental is really important. It's also good to kind of think of a bunch of different people who you might suggest they talk to, because they might not be comfortable talking with us, or they might not be comfortable talking to their school counselor. So being able to give them options and say, well, if you don't have a good relationship with this person, or you really don't feel like you can talk to your parents about it, what about this other resource? So having a good idea of who there is in your community to talk to. And then it sounds really obvious, but reminding people that abuse is not their fault. It might be the first time that somebody's ever actually heard that. It might really change their perspective, especially if their abusive partner or even just a disrespectful partner is always blaming all the problems on the relationship on them. Continuing to check in, even if it seems like somebody's in a better place, like they've broken up with the person or they've left the house where it's unsafe. There's still a lot of long-term mental health stuff going on there. So continuing to check in and just see how they're doing, if they need anything else, is important. We like to do safety planning with a lot of the people who call our hotline, because a lot of people who call are not at the point where they're ready to leave yet. Especially if they're living with the person who's abusing them. So a safety plan is just a way to think of what are some small changes you can make now to help you feel safer until you're at the point where you're ready to leave. So it could be making sure that you have extra money and anything important like your passport, your driver's license, your school ID, making sure that's in a safe place that the abusive person doesn't have access to. It could be making sure that if you're worried about, like, let's say that my partner drinks a lot on the weekends, making sure I have somewhere else I can go and spend time so that I'm not around that person and feeling stressed out and nervous about what might happen, right? So even though it's not changing the whole situation immediately, it's just little things that they can do to feel safer in the meantime. If you're talking to them about something you've noticed, just being really clear about what the behaviors are. You could use the wheel. I'm going to send the slides to Misty so she can send them on. But the wheel could be a really helpful thing for people if they've never seen one before. They've never thought of abuse as anything other than physical. And if you feel like it's a serious situation where you really need to get an adult involved because you think it's going to escalate, you can always refer to our hotline. We've had a lot of experience with people in crisis, so definitely used to working with that. And if you have a friend or somebody you know who you think is being abusive, people don't really like to talk about that side of things, but it is something that happens. Letting them know that it isn't normal or okay. A lot of times people will continue acting in a way that's harmful to others because they think nobody else has noticed or nobody's at least willing to do anything about it. So talking to them about the behavior, especially if it's something that they've seen modeled for them, so they always think that it's something that was normal or just how relationships work. Asking them questions about the actions and behaviors to really get an understanding of, do they know what they're doing, and can they really not think of any other way to communicate or not communicate with another person? holding them accountable because they do have the ability to control or change their responses. If they're jealous because they're afraid the person's going to leave them for somebody else, there's ways to deal with that without controlling everywhere their partner goes and everyone their partner talks to. And there is some resources in the community for dealing with like anger management or people who maybe aren't acting in a way they think is their best. We're not necessarily a resource for that. Our grant funding prohibits us from working with people who have committed abuse, but we're happy to refer if that's something that people need access to. So what ideas do you all have that you think would encourage healthier relationships in the community? So other than connecting with people who might be experiencing abuse on either side, what do you think would do more of that prevention?
I think like raising awareness is really important so that like people can like help themselves, but also like help friends or people that they know. I know, I think you came to talk to Young Feminists, which I was there for.
Nice
But
to see you again. That is true. I did do that.
events like that where you can like reach a lot of people, I think are good.
Yeah, definitely having a lot of events in a lot of different parts of the community. Definitely a good idea. What else do you think helps people have healthier relationships? Misty, do you have any ideas?
I mean, I think what you covered before, outside of positive peer support, outside of education, and awareness, I think just a culture of being able to give feedback and advocacy, just empowering folks, young folks as well, to sort of advocate for what they want. I think self-awareness is one of those skills that young people and adults alike are trying to work on all the time. So like practicing that skill of self-awareness, goal setting, like visioning what you want for your future. Those are some maybe activities that I think folks of all ages could do.
Yeah, definitely good thoughts. Because if we're thinking, I want a healthy friendship, a healthy relationship, or I want someone who respects my boundaries, a lot of times we've never just sat down and even thought about what that looks like. So it's a really good opportunity to do that and have spaces to do that. And I think projects like this council and all the other cool things that go on in Charlottesville are also really encouraging towards having healthy relationships. Because when people feel empowered to share their thoughts and opinions and connect with their peers, it does a lot of really positive things. So kudos to you all because you're already doing the things. Okay. So I want to share about a couple of events that we're doing. And then if you all have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Or if you would like connection to any resources, I'm happy to do that also. I tend to do a couple online workshops a month. It's slowing down because people are starting to do in-person stuff again. But what I have prepared for May is a workshop on teen safety planning. So safety planning, again, is thinking of those small things that can make somebody's day-to-day life safer, even if they're not able to leave an unsafe home or break up with an unsafe partner. And I did this specifically for teens because it looks a lot different when you cannot drive and are legally a minor and don't have access to a lot of other resources the way that adults do. And then I have another one on the 16th, which is on like conflict resolution, healthy arguments, stuff like that. Everything that we do is free, and the workshops do use closed captioning. If somebody needs like a language translation or something, they can just let me know and I can arrange that. And then at the end of April, we have a family fun convo that's for specifically parents of like 7 to 13-year-olds. So if you know anybody or if you have younger siblings and you think it'd be helpful for the parents in the community to talk with a bunch of preventionists, we'll be out and ready to chat with people. It'll be a fun time. And then these are just some of the community resources in the area. So we have our hotline. The Sexual Assault Resource Agency also has a hotline. We do a lot of overlap work with them. If somebody's experienced sexual violence in the context of a romantic relationship. We also have the Teen Health Center at UVA that does a lot of really helpful community service, specifically around like mental health and physical health for young teenagers. I also have some national hotlines. If you know somebody who's not in our service area, but you think they still would benefit from talking to somebody, these will just serve anywhere in the US. And then there's also a deaf hotline, which is kind of like a video thing like this, where people can talk if they are deaf or hard of hearing. Lovers Respect has some really cool resources like healthy relationship quizzes, which if you know somebody who maybe they're just starting to think about their relationship as something that's unhealthy, it can be a low-key way of getting them to just take the quiz and see what their score is and talk about it a little bit. And then I also have the state hotline for specifically for LGBTQ partner abuse, because that's a population I run into a lot in this area. And a lot of times people want a really specific resource that's built for that, so that they can know they're going to get somebody who's qualified to discuss that.
I'm going to also put a plug in for the loveisrespect.org, because I've used that in my career in mentoring young people, teenagers specifically. And as far as like the way you described it, it's like one of those quizzes that you take that's like true or so it's really low key, but also like helps raise the awareness. Like, is this okay? Is this not okay? And it kind of puts it on that spectrum of, yes, you're in a healthy relationship. Maybe you're at this point in unhealthy, or this is actually abusive. And so rather than looking at the wheel, if you don't have access to the wheel, that's like a really cool, quick online tool that I've often had teens take, and they are very sort of surprised at the results. But it's a great way to have a conversation.
Yeah, I think it feels a little less like accusatory, because sometimes if people hear you wanting to put like the label of abuse on their relationship, they get naturally very defensive. So it's a little bit more low key of a way of getting them to think about it. Does anybody have any questions, comments, or concerns?
I have a question for the broader group. We have about 13 minutes, and I need to do some housekeeping before we sign off. But one of the questions that I have is, you know, how does this relate to your role as youth council? Like, what sort of things, where is your mind right now as far as your role at youth council, and how does this intersect with your role?
I was kind of thinking just now about more like how we would get this information even more widespread to the community and to more youth, because I think that is somewhat what our job would be to help spread this information and these resources so that when people are in need, they know where to go. Because
Right.
like these numbers and a lot of things like that aren't just things that people know off the top of their head. So I think we need to make it readily available information for everyone.
I do want to point out Alex's comment in the chat, I was also going to bring up a question for you, Alex. Let's say somebody that either is watching this youth council meeting or one of the youth council members, somebody comes to them with information. Is the SHE hotline a place where they can get advice on being a bystander?
Yeah, they definitely can. They can also, if they would prefer to talk to me directly, they can do that. If they like want to email, I would probably suggest emailing me rather than just like info at SHE Shelter if they have a more in-depth question like that. The shelter staff are really encouraging and supportive, and we do have like people's family members and partners call sometimes if they're like, oh, my sister or my boyfriend has been through something like this and I just want to know how to help them. They're very capable and willing to do that.
Thank you. Well, Alex, thank you for this, not only practical, but just, educational presentation. You squeezed a lot in a short period of time. So kudos to you for being able to like streamline this information to where it's digestible. And I appreciate that you're willing to share these slides, and I can forward it to the group afterwards so that they have these resources to share as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I love having these conversations more in depth. So if anybody's ever interested, then just let me know. I'll come to you.
So when you send me the slides and I forward it on to them, I'll include your email address and contact information. So if they have follow-up, they can reach out to you.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Before we sign off of Youth Council, I just have a couple of housekeeping items that I wanted to check in about. So we have one more organization that's going to present. It's going to be SARA, S-A-R-A, Sexual Assault Response Agency, and they're going to do a presentation about their resources. But that will be the last community organization presentation. I know that you guys have had several presentations over the course of the year. So that's going to happen on April 28th. And then I have you all tentatively scheduled to do your end of term presentation to City Council on May 16th. It's a Monday. And so just kind of getting a pulse check. Are you all available Monday, May 16th?
I have a wedding that's out of town that weekend, so I'm not sure if we'll be back by then, but I'll know closer to that day. I just don't know what like our travel plans are.
Okay. Anybody else know if they're going to be here or not?
I think I'm gonna be here, but yeah, I don't think I'm leaving town at all in May. So I think that
Okay.
whole month is good.
Yeah, I think I'll be here too.
Me too.
Okay. I'll check in with the other members. We have a couple of options on that May 16th. So there is a report session that happens at 4 o'clock. I think last year you guys did the 4 o'clock presentation, but I'm not sure. Is 4 o'clock a reasonable time for you all to do a presentation? I don't know what the bell schedule is in your schools.
4 is like kind of right when we get out of school. But I mean, I think we would be able to leave early. Like, I think the school would let us. I think it would just be getting transportation for everyone, which I don't think would be a huge problem.
Okay. The other option is that we would push it back to the evening meeting, which is much later. So you would sign on at like 6:30, but we might not go on until like 7:30 or 8. Do you guys have a preference of the 4 o'clock time or like 7 o'clock time.
Sorry, would this be online or would we like go in person?
That's my next question. So the city council is considering going back in person at their next council meeting. That's tentative, but it looks like they're moving that way. So I think at this point, it's still going to be a hybrid option, but I'm not sure if you're doing a presentation, whether you're required to go in person or not. So I guess my next question is, are you all available to go in person if the meeting's in person? Or would you require an online presentation?
I could go in person.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I could go in person.
Well, Eve, if you're back in town, are you feeling comfortable going in person?
Yeah, I think that would be fine. Yeah, I'll just check with my parents, but yeah, that should be fine.
Okay. Okay. Well, I will update you as soon as I know. If it is in person, is it easier does it make a difference on the time of day? Would 4 o'clock still be fine for an in-person? Or if it's in person, do you prefer to do the evening slot, which could potentially go late?
I think that if it's in person and we're doing it at 4 o'clock, then you'll have to contact like CHS admin or whatever and get us out of class because they won't really let us leave. I kind of feel like evening would also work for me, I think.
Okay, I can definitely do that.
Yeah, I could do either, but I think we would have to get permission to leave, like according to the rules.
Okay, sure thing. So if we have one more presentation on the 28th, that leaves one meeting to create the presentation. Is that feasible?
I think that's pretty feasible as long as if you would be kind enough to kind of like send out notes from this meeting and then I can make like a Google Doc and kind of just put all the notes that we've received from Daniel and you over the weeks on there so we can kind of use that to pool our resources. Would that be all right with everyone?
Yeah, okay. We may have some time at the end of the presentation on the 28th to kind of get started. But do you all have a sense of sort of a theme or a purpose, like an objective that you want to happen for the city council presentation?
I don't really know if this is kind of just speaking for me, but I kind of like the idea that has been brought up at a couple other meetings of creating like a youth council newsletter, some kind of resource that we could send out on a certain interval that would just like report on what the city council is doing and also on what a bunch of other organizations are doing, just to spread awareness to basically youth and also the whole community in general about like what's going on in the city.
Other thoughts on how to organize the presentation? So I assume part of it will be sort of giving a summary of who presented and sort of what topics were presented on. So like a recap, like Eve was saying, a recap of what you've already learned and engaged in, and then maybe what you're saying, Harrison, some action steps that we could, as a youth council or as a council, take to incorporate that, what you guys sort of took away from those presentations. Okay. All right. Any other last thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, celebrations to share? Awesome. Well, you guys have a wonderful evening. Thanks for coming today. I hope Friday is good to you and you coast into the weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next time. Bye.